Hi, I'm Shivani Persad, and welcome to The Bigger Issue, the show where we find out what's really behind those nasty comments left on social media. In each episode, we'll dissect a hateful comment directed towards a familiar Canadian face. How did it make them feel? What's the underlying issue behind the comment? How did they overcome it, and what can we learn from their experience? Join us as we deep dive into internet culture and cyberbullying. Today, we're talking to Hemali Mistry. Hemali is arguably one of the most outspoken makeup artists in the South Asian diaspora. Aside from her makeup account, she also has another account, Up to No Good, where she talks about taboo and controversial topics. Hemali's vulnerability seems to make people uncomfortable, really uncomfortable.
It is very intimidating, I think, for some people to see a strong, unapologetic woman that is okay with being vulnerable, okay with sharing hardships, but also like persevering and being successful. I think that scares people in a way. And I think there's nothing more powerful than a vulnerable woman. You know, we've been taught to dim our light. Women who haven't worked through that internalized misogyny, like, will find it especially intimidating because they're just like, why is she allowed to be like that? And for men, now we expect them to also be emotional and have that emotional intelligence. They've been raised in a society where they're told not to be vulnerable, but they'll take it out in a way where it's like, no, I need to tear her down in order to keep that power.
Although her intention is to call people in and demonstrate that it's not weak to be vulnerable, but instead that we can relate to each other through our vulnerabilities, people's reaction are to tell her things like, you'll never find a husband. All you do is complain. You just hate men, or you must be such a disappointment to your parents. How does it make you feel that some people are receiving your content in the exact opposite way than you intended?
I don't think the comments really bothered me until I got to this phase of my life where I was talking about more controversial topics, more taboo stuff. Growing up with a lot of emotional trauma, generational trauma, I think around the time when I started becoming a makeup artist and like really making it my full-time career, I was going through a huge transformational change mentally. I didn't feel fulfilled just talking about makeup. I think those kind of comments really started to bother me when I first started that, because it was very personal. It wasn't surface level anymore. It wasn't like, oh, her foundation doesn't match. Like that I can deal with, but for them to be like, your experiences are not valid, your feelings are not valid, like what you're going through is just so minor, like why are you complaining about it? It does hurt.
In recent years, we have seen a huge surge of people, especially women, being more vulnerable on the internet. From celebrities posting about mental health, to birth struggles, to career pitfalls, to apologies. On a platform like TikTok, where it often seems like content doesn't have to be as polished, there is a lot of real conversation happening, but that also means a lot more bullying. How do you cope with receiving so many negative comments?
I get way more positive comments than I do negative comments, right? And those are the comments I decide to focus on, and I decide to kind of carry in my heart rather than those negative comments, because I think if I did, it would just start to discourage me from my mission. And you know, I know there's people out there that need to hear these words, that need to feel validated, that need to talk about these experiences.
Do you ever respond to those negative comments? And if so, why?
I know there's so many people out there that would be triggered by those comments, and it's really to help those people that would be triggered and that would feel bad about when people say things like this, to help ease that pain for them.
This is an interesting point. Creators have the opportunity to use negative comments to demonstrate to their followers a more constructive way of thinking. In Hemali's case, she often responds to these comments not by responding to that particular commenter, but instead using that comment to illustrate to her followers a better and more positive perspective from which they can approach receiving negative comments.
Because so many of us are struggling with our own mental health problems, it's hard to show up and be compassionate towards other people. It's hard to show up and be vulnerable. If you give people the tools to be able to emotionally regulate themselves, it's easier to have difficult conversations around stigmatized and taboo topics. So I think if social media apps like really prioritize content creators that talked about those things, it would make a huge difference.
Here are some takeaways takeaways from my discussion with Hemali that inspire me to be more vulnerable on social media because it's for the betterment of all of us. Number one, don't be afraid to step out of your niche or comfort zone and be your full self.
I don't want to just be known for makeup. I have a lot of things to talk about. Why do I need to be stuck in this box when you confine someone into this like one stream of doing something? You take away their power to be something else. It stops people from growing.
Number two, recognize the power in what it means to be vulnerable. You're showing up for yourself and you're showing up for others that relate to you.
I think a lot of people think that being vulnerable is a sign of weakness, but it's really not. Never before have you been able to reach like hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of people from the comfort of your own home. I think if more people showed up vulnerably and fought for the minorities, fought for the adversities that we face, that message would get across, and we just never had that opportunity before.
Number three, social media is evolving, and as users, we have the opportunity to steer it in the right direction.
Growing up in a South Asian community, especially, like, we weren't allowed to be vulnerable. We were taught to really keep things in. If that's how we operate, problems aren't going to be resolved, and there's a lot of people that just end up suffering in silence. And so if that means I need to take the bullet in order to start this conversation, then so be it. The future generations aren't going to live happier lives. The trauma that we get passed down is just going to continue to pass down, and it's just going to continue to be a vicious cycle, and someone needs to break that.
I'd like to thank Hemali for taking her time to have this discussion with me, and also just for being so unapologetically herself on the internet all the time. If we want to stop bullying on the internet, we have to normalize the things that people get bullied for being vulnerable, for sharing insecurities, for looking different, for having mental health struggles. If those things aren't seen as different or less worthy or not cool, then maybe when people interact with that type of content, their first instinct won't be to bully someone. Thanks for watching The Bigger Issue. Do you have stories about overcoming cyberbullying? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if there's a topic you'd like me to cover or someone that you'd like me to interview for the next episode of The Bigger Issue, let me know that in the comments too. I'm Shivani Persad, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.